Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Head of Strategic Initiatives for Europe at Fidelity International and a member of the CFA UK's Inclusion and Diversity Committee. And I'm delighted to welcome today Virginie Maisonneuve, who's part of a long career in asset management, is currently the Global CIO Equity at Allianz Global Investors in London, and also Jaynes, the former CEO of MS Amlin Investment Management. Jayne's also an executive coach and actively involved with the Diversity Project. So welcome, Virginie and Jayne. It's really great to have you join us today. And we're delighted to have you here with us to share your insights, your thoughts, your advice to this discussion on how we really want to move the needle on inclusion. So look, to set the scene, I thought I'd kick off with a question to both of you. I'd like to ask both of you how the early influences in your career have really formed your view on why inclusion and diversity matters in our industry. Coming to you for this.
Yes, well, thank you, Juliet. Really happy to be here with CFA, you and Jayne. So I think from my perspective, what's really been impactful is actually, I was born in France, but left right after my MBA to go and work and live in China. That was in the mid-'80s. And that first, if you want, immersion for work into a global culture, followed then by moving on to Scotland in asset management, then the US, etc. That global experience really helped me understand how different cultures, different gender, different socioeconomic background and education could play to their strengths, right? Firsthand. From early personal experience, I think that I really believe that inclusion is linked to acceptance of diversity. And acceptance ultimately is about equal opportunity. And that in turn really has an impact on productivity and energy management, which of course benefits companies, but also the human beings, working in an environment where they feel accepted. And there's really some brain science that I've personally, experienced behind that inclusion. In terms of, being at your best and being really able to take on challenge and advice from different people. And I think to be at your best. So I think that would be my answer.
That's great. And Jayne, I'm fascinated to hear, how you formed your views around I&D over your career.
Yeah, well, thank you. And also I'm very, very pleased to be part of this discussion. Thank you. It's similar but slightly different to Virginie. Diversity is about perspectives, and when I started as a portfolio manager, so I was based in the UK, but I was running my startup, running European money, then moved on to emerging markets, Pacific ex-Japan and Japan, and as I moved from each of those, like Virginie says, you understand that there's a different growth dynamic and there's a different culture in each place. But then because I was bringing the what I'd learned from previous experience, then I was able to challenge the conventional wisdom and the market consensus in those areas. Because really, if you think about it, that's really the same as it's market groupthink. And I was frequently told throughout my career that I asked different questions. And I think it's because of that build-up of that understanding that it's given me the different perspectives on markets. It's very important, though, that those perspectives can be heard so that they're listened to and they're taken into account. And as a junior and as the only female, then sometimes that was not... I wasn't able to get that across. Obviously, that changed over time, but I think it is important. Everybody's got different perspectives, and it's important to be able to capture those. But I completely agree with Virginie as well about the importance of people feeling comfortable to be that they feel valued and respected. and that way we'll get the benefit of those collective perspectives.
Thank you both for that. And I think given our topic, moving the needle on inclusion, just as a sort of follow-up question to you, Jayne, and then Virginie, from your perspective, why do you think that an emphasis on inclusion is particularly important now in today's business environment?
Yeah, thank you. Well, an inclusive culture is really about making good decisions, and it creates a collective intelligence, which I alluded to, with getting people's different perspectives and different views. So to me, within an inclusive culture, it's based on trust, it's fair, and it's got the different perspectives. And if we look at what's been happening over the recent years, what's happening today, I think both organisations and markets are becoming increasingly complex. And therefore, it's really important that companies are able to make really good decisions. Also, the inclusive culture is linked to well-being as well, to the people who are in, again, a bit like echoing what Virginie said. It's linked to better well-being, higher engagement, productivity, profitability. So it's an enabler to businesses. And I think with the need to be agile and resilient, I think it's more important than ever today.
Powerful words, thank you. And Virginie, your perspective on why in particular inclusion is important today.
Well, absolutely on board with what Jayne has said. So, it's not only about the productivity aspect that I was talking about, but also perhaps one additional factor is to respect and to reflect the stakeholders that we have in asset management, which are client base, clearly our board members or regulators or clients, generally at large, our employees, very important. And I think it's increasingly important to them. And again, reflecting those stakeholders are linked to the neuroscience. If you think of mirror neurons and connection, how you create connection, that's really, really important. As we discussed, it does yield results. And one of the way that I have promoted, if you want, inclusion in my groups is working by task forces. So particularly when you have to deal with complex problems that involve different divisions. So not only investments, but maybe ops and marketing and legal or whatever, or technology. I find the task force format really helpful because you bring people from different backgrounds together and you have a very clear agenda and problem solving goal. And I find that this is very, very helpful, not only to resolve an issue efficiently, but also for people to connect across the group and appreciate the diversity in skill set in particular. So, I've used some of this task force to understand how we could use artificial intelligence, for example, in asset management. And then the last point that I would make is we also have to remind ourselves of two very important trends, which are digitalization of the world and the demographic trend. And, those are very much linked in the sense that millennials and generation Gen Z, employees and clients and stakeholders will really demand that inclusion today, or they will want from their brands. They will want to understand why the culture is not inclusive. And of course, in the digital age, with information being published instantly all around the world, that has a huge impact in terms of the success of a business. So I think those are my main points.
Compelling stuff. Sorry, I'm struggling there with my mute button. And very much a fan of the task force approach rather than let's set up a new committee. So completely with you on that one. So staying with you, I'm really interested to hear, and I think our listeners, audience will be too, how you're approaching the S and the G within your ESG engagement strategy. There's this huge, strong focus on climate, quite understandably, that we're seeing at the moment. But how do we ensure that there is enough focus on the other important ESG areas as well?
Yeah, so I think that's really important. So you mentioned engagement, really, really important. So when we engage, we have a strategy called CWO, Climate Engagement with Outcome. Of course, that's not only about climate engagement, is also understanding the vision that teams have, companies, invested companies have, the governance aspect, but also having an integrated ESG, which is for most of our strategies across the platform. Integrated ESG really takes that governance and that ESG at heart from the bottom up, as well as you would say the top down. If I said top down, being using data and in some cases artificial intelligence to help us navigate this massive amount of data. Another aspect on the S in particular, which I think has been really, for somebody who's looked at ESG for most of my career in the past 35 years, I'm very pleased to see that one of the positive impact of COVID has been really more focused on ESG. And I think particularly the S of ESG. We're doing a fair amount of work on what we call inclusive capitalism. And from that, we're looking, at it from a risk management standpoint, as well as how to improve sustainability in crisis. And you're looking at this human capital, if you want. And that's both of a top-down process again and a bottom-up process. So, it's understanding how the erosion of social cohesion or the rise of inequalities can impact a company, a country, governance framework, how we create resilience. Ultimately, each company will rely on its clients and its suppliers, as we've seen with the global supply chain, to function. Understanding the social aspects of that resilience is very important. And recently, if you look at the impact of inflation on the tech world, for example, you can see how small companies and large companies have been impacted differently because of the ability to actually find talent. Therefore, the S being very important, but also pay up for talent in this inflationary trend. So really, really important. We also pay a lot of attention to the social impact of restructuring plans, social chain involvement, retraining program, impact on local communities. And there, it's always hard to measure, but measuring is something that we're very keen on. And of course, inclusive planet solutions. From a governance standpoint, clearly the do no harm indicators are very important to us, and we have our own proprietary scores, if you want, but also board responsibilities across the board to ESG. We actually published a survey yesterday on voting, against boards who are not supporting ESG. So that's important. So board responsibility, not only with climate, but also with broad ESG mandate. Their expertise in that area is very important. And of course, remuneration linked to climate sustainability in general. So those are just a few of the things that we're doing, but I'm really excited and proud of the work that AllianzGI is doing there.
That sounds fascinating. So holding yourselves to account as well as the companies in which you invest on behalf of clients. And Jayne, I think this links into what I was keen to do next. Virginie's touched on a couple of these points, but with your experience across financial services, how embedded do you think the view is becoming that companies focusing on D&I is increasingly seen as a license to operate? It's not a nice to have. This is how we have to do business.
Well, certainly, from what Virginie's saying, there's a great focus on the companies that are being invested in. But also from what she's saying, she's a shining example of doing things internally. But I would say that the data for the investment management industry is not really showing yet that that is across the board. So it is becoming a license to operate, but I don't think it has been, and I don't think it is at the moment. But there is increasing attention from clients. We've got the asset owners charter, which is going to be asking more questions of asset managers. We've got the regulators, and also, as we said, this is really good for people working in the business, for engagement. There's less burnout, there's fewer sick days. So in terms of attracting and retaining talent, it's becoming more and more important, particularly as we head into this, or we are in this war for talent. So it's good to see that there are different pushes. And I think there is, I think within asset management, there is, people get it, but as yet, they've not actually got to full maturity.
Yes, the great resignation, I think, in a way, as you say, will help or more organisations have that lens through which we need to look at how we can attract and retain all the right people. Absolutely. So that, I think that's sort of helpful back perspectives and views more broadly. But turning to more practical steps, Jayne, what are the key steps that you've seen being taken up that are the most impactful to inclusion? Because it's inclusion that we're discussing here today.
Yeah, and I think an inclusion is, as I said, it's fair and it's got diverse perspectives. So to me, it's the overarching part. So as you mentioned, I've been doing some work with the Diversity Project, and I stepped back and was looking at where I could help to shift the dial. So I spent the last year researching an inclusive culture guide, which was launched earlier this week, where I've looked at what organisations have done, but also what behavioural science says as well. I mean, I've always been a big believer in behavioural science within investment decision making, and that can be applied also to talent decisions, but also just picking up on one of the things Virginie said about bringing people together, that creates hormone changes that are positive, which helps to build trust and the feelings of belonging. So from the research, I in the guide, I've got two main pillars. One is people, and one is frameworks. So as I said, you're bringing people together so that we can start to and working together on a business problem, then that can help build teams, build trust, and help people feel that they belong, and to understand how the lived experiences of other people are as well, which I think is really important. The other point is also having this. So culture starts from the top. So having an inclusive CEO, and that means it's somebody who's humble, who's kind, and who listens. And for then that CEO to bring together a task force of volunteers. So again, I'm saying Virginie is doing a lot of this, but this is, and also the science shows that having a task force, bringing people together to start to shift the dial is a very important thing. It does work. And then if we look at the frameworks, so the frameworks would be the piping and the plumbing, which help to level the playing field so that we can get those diverse perspectives and that they're listened to. So very important is long-term planning to know that your needs, because people, if they can't see many people like them in a business, they're going to be more reluctant to go and join. So building a talent bench, being very proactive, looking very widely, creatively. For instance, returners, targeted referrals that are looking for diverse talent, I think is really important, and is seen to be important. Also looking internally as well, because I think that's often overlooked. People look to go externally, but there's this talent within businesses that could move into other departments. Having transparency about promotion prospects and also compensation ranges. But also we need to look to widen the talent pool by looking at very specific points that are going to be success criteria for that role, for each role. The longer your list of criteria, the smaller your talent pool is going to be. And don't look for past experience. Research shows that that is not a good predictor of performance. So be very specific, six max, and for those to be focused on behaviors, and certainly don't focus on any technical skills that can be easily taught. And then within the when you're actually recruiting and you're shortlisting, make sure you've got at least 2 people from non-stereotypical backgrounds on the shortlist, because statistically, unless you have that, then the decisions like to go along with the stereotypical person. Also has very, very robust structure around the recruitment. So using work samples and using structured interviews and using the wisdom of the crowd by having people individually score candidates, averaging their scores before there's any discussion about who might be selected or taken forward. Because as soon as you start to have those discussions, you can start to have the first person to speak, their view, people anchor on their view, or it's the person who's the loudest and most confident. So it's really important that there's a structure around that. And that is allowing better decisions to be made. If you think about it, pilots and surgeons all have structure around what they're doing so that they can do their jobs to the best. And I think we need to be doing more of that on recruitment.
Well, there's tons there. Thank you for that. I mean, I heard, oh dear, I'm sorry, I am working from home today and there is a delivery van outside my house. I'm going to keep talking. I'm sorry about the dog. But I heard about robust processes around promotion, talent acquisition, internal first, couldn't agree with that more, and focusing on behaviours. Love all of that. Thank you. I'm going to ask my next question quickly. So Virginie, turning to you on this sort of practical steps, I'm just, I think we'd all be really interested to hear what steps you've seen being taken throughout your career that have actually worked, that have actually brought more diversity and more inclusion to those sort of, particularly to the top exec position, but at any point in the pyramid, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet. And that is really important, because I think companies that have that inclusion culture throughout will have more inclusive top executive position and boards if it's imposed, if you want, from the top down, or nearly like a figure, because it has to happen, and it doesn't transpire through the whole organization. It's artificial, and ultimately, in my view, it doesn't work. So what has worked, what I found helpful, leadership programs I find really helpful for several reasons. One, for the content, but also because they bring people together, going back to what Jayne was talking about. And in particular, they allow you to find talent internally that you may not have thought about from other divisions. And, it's, I find one area that I really like is growth mindset. Growth mindset leadership programs, or based on growth mindset development programs, I really find them efficient. Training programs are on raising the level of awareness. So, they don't have to be unconscious bias, but talking about things, talking about inclusion in different formats. It can be through D&I, initiatives. So, for example, we have D&I initiatives, and I'm inviting them. They're actually coming to talk to my executive, group next week. And it's putting that in front of the program, even when we have busy time, making sure that those are topics, not only when they become issues, but topics that are promoted, discussed, so that they can become part of the norm. I think that's very important. Mentoring program I find very effective. So I find mentoring program not only effective for the people who are being mentored, but also the mentors. It allows people who are mentoring to understand the organization better and to understand what the aspirations are so that we keep people and we coach them to become more senior in the organization. So I think mentoring makes senior executives better senior executives and help the organization overall. Jayne talked about the headhunters. I totally agree with that. I would also say strong HR partners. I find that generally HR partners are underrated, and they're actually really important at helping top management to understand what is going on in the organization. Are they trends? Are they new things? Are they people who are very good but in the wrong job, for example, and they will leave if they're not happy, if they don't feel included. So how do we harness that? I think also putting on the agenda senior management group discussions and learning around the positive impact of D&I and inclusion is very important, as well as for boards. As we know, we all can learn. Jaynes mentioned neuroscience and brain science. I'm also a big fan of that. And I think, we're all learning all the time. And that's what makes, life very interesting. And then finally, what I would say is external intervention. So, put yourself out there with CFA, with other networks. So, I'm part of BWBN as well, the Bloomberg Women Buy-Side Network, mentoring, and all of those interventions, I think, help promote your own creativity around what you can do in the field internally. Thank you.
No, that's great. I mean, there's just so much in there. That's fantastic. So whether it's the external exposure for individuals, the benefits of strong HR business partners, the HR people in this audience will be thrilled to hear that, because as you say, I think they're rather overlooked. Leadership and mentoring programs and that ongoing discussion around D&I is just not one. It's not one. The reality is that, you're both busy women. Everybody listening are very busy. We can't do everything all at the same time. So which specific area, Virginie, would you prioritize that you think can make the most impact now? Obviously, it's quite organizational specific, but from your perspective, what would you get that focus on now?
So I think it depends on the organization, the size of the organization, the resources that you have. But I would say I would classify them into different categories. I would say, the ability for each of us to have an external impact and seize opportunities, even if it's 1 hour a quarter, we can all give 1 hour a quarter to mentor people or to do internal talks or organize, coffees or, as well as internal. Organize coffees with people internally, even if they're virtual, to get to know people in the organization and talk about that. So I think that's definitely something that's feasible. In terms of mentoring program, I'm a big fan of that. So again, if one can give, an hour a quarter on mentoring specific, girls in finance, for example, which is one of the initiatives that I support with Tara Gain. Trying to help people throughout the whole pipeline, and then otherwise really supporting strong leadership programs. So those would be my top three picks. But of course, it depends on the resources and the size of the organization, particularly for leadership programs.
No, that's great and understood. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. It's just with your just to get your perspective. And Jayne, the same question to you.
Yeah, if I could just before that just pick up on a couple of things that Virginie was saying. I totally agree on the mentoring side, more so than sponsorship. Sponsorship hasn't actually proven to select people who then perform well in roles necessarily. But with mentoring, you're giving people confidence to come forward, but you need to have a robust internal application process that allows internal candidates to apply. But the other point is as well, I call it mutual mentoring, because it's a two-way conversation. So it's really a very good opportunity for more senior people to really understand what's going on, what it's like to work in your organisation. So I just sort of echo absolutely all of that. I think it's really positive. Again, the context is absolutely key. So I think my first priority would be for any organisation is to get the data. Maybe have an external audit of your culture, but gather the data and then do a really granular analysis of that data to understand where there are there'll be pockets of good practice, which Virginie definitely sounds to be one, and there'll be pockets where there's not good practice. So, and where there are barriers and where there are unwritten rules. So I think understand your context, then you can make decisions of what to do based on fact rather than sort of supposition. And then from that is to, I'm going to plug the guide, but it takes you through a process of decision making. But just small steps. This doesn't have to be big fanfares. We are looking for systems redesign, but it can happen slowly with the task force as there to help to get the ball rolling, and to, as we said, to get people working together across the business.
I mean, just that where your starting point is, understand what's working, what's not working, and then you can make an appropriate plan from there. Thank you very much for that. So look, as we approach the sort of the end of this session, when you consider all the things that we've discussed, what is your one key piece of advice to people listening today of how they can fundamentally impact inclusion? So Jayne, your thoughts on that?
Sure. No, thank you. So we talked about culture starting from the top, but actually culture is for everyone, by everyone. So I would say to everybody here today that if you're not intentionally including, you're probably accidentally excluding. So I think it's really important for each of us to understand what makes us feel excluded, and to start to use this knowledge to understand how to actively include others. Go have conversations, listen to them, find out what it is like to work in the business. And so that might be my thing, is everybody here can start to make a difference.
And if it's just expanding on that slightly, because I think it's really good advice. If you're a manager of people, what does intentional inclusion look like if you're actually managing a team, as individual contributor?
Yeah. So inclusion doesn't mean everybody's involved with everything, but what it does mean is that people feel respected and valued. They feel informed. They feel that they've got choices and that they're listened to. So it's about making sure that they know what's going on, but asking opinions, having conversations, getting different people around the table to get involved with discussions. So that would be, there was this sort of debate. That's how people will feel included, if they feel, as I said, respected, valued, informed, that they're treated fairly, that they have choices, and that they're listened to.
So they've got quite a lot on their plate, people managers, to get this stuff right, because
one of the things
different people.
Yeah. So one of the things I suggest is that other people have done is to bring together manager cohorts. And it's really important that managers are supported through this change. And so bring managers together. They can provide, you can include an external facilitator to start with, but so that they can discuss what inclusion means like. And one of the things we haven't talked about actually, but probably should have done, is about broadening the talent pool is flexible working as the norm, which will bring challenges to managers. So it's about that, those manager cohorts, they can discuss what works, what doesn't. It brings peer support, it brings peer challenge, but it will start, the norms will shift over time, but managers definitely need support.
Great advice. Thank you, Jayne. And Virginie, to the discussion out, interested in your key piece of advice on what you think can really make an impact in this space.
Yeah, I think my key words would be action. Own it. Don't wait for others to do it. I think there are a lot of people out there who say, yeah, I really understand what you mean. Yeah, I agree with you. But then it's that step into action that I think really makes the difference. Think of ways where you can influence, and sometimes they're very small. It could be informal mentoring. It could be representing your organization at an event. Be a problem solver, but also a good listener. Sometimes we can resolve things by listening, but in any case, listening is absolutely crucial. And understand the dynamics. So, belong to different groups in the organization if you can, or outside. So I feel very fortunate to be part of CFA Future of Finance, for example, and the connections there, and thinking about sustainability, thinking about this and how you can take this into your organization and have initiatives. And they don't have to be big initiatives, that I think is really, really important. And for me, the informal mentoring is the area where you can really own it. And you see somebody struggling, just reach out, promote a conversation, a coffee, and one person at a time. Just try to help them and help them feel like they're listened to. I think most of the time that is a big impact initiative.
Listening and actioning, love it. Thank you, Virginie, and thank you, Jayne. And thank you both for being with us today and sharing your thoughts and insights and advice on what each of us can do to move the needle on inclusion. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.